during the 19th century, many of our ancestors, including mine, were victims of pogroms, massacres, incited by fanatical religious leaders who denounced the Baha'is as kind of infidels and wayward sects and incited violence against them. So there was always a sense of vulnerability. The Baha'is were the scapegoat in Iran. Whenever something went wrong politically, they would be demonized and there would be episodes of violence against them. So when I was 9 years old, my parents migrated to Canada. As a 9-year-old, it was very difficult for me to see why we left our beautiful life that we had in Iran to go there. And of course, my parents knew that if there was any political turmoil in Iran, the Baha'is would be the first victims.
This was in the 70s?
Exactly. And when in 1978-79, the revolution happened, Ayatollah Khomeini came to Tehran, the Islamic Republic was established, and everyone thought that this was the beginning of utopian, democratic states. But instead, we had mass executions and repression of women and religious minorities and what have you. The dream and fantasy very quickly turned into a nightmare. So we were in Canada at the time, watching our beautiful, innocent world unravel and turn into this nightmare. So we had many friends, family who were arrested, who were imprisoned. Many were executed simply because of their religious beliefs. This reminds me of what Jean-Paul Sartre said about anti-Semitism. He says, the Jew exists in the mind of the anti-Semite. If he did not exist, the anti-Semite would invent him. So anti-Baha'i hatred had nothing to do with what the Baha'is had done, but it was a kind of ideological need for a totalitarian regime to consolidate its grip on power. So you demonize a minority, you accuse them of every conceivable evil, you massacre them, and you in that way create, revolutionary fervor. When I was 16 years old, I think I had a life-changing experience when I heard that a 16-year-old contemporary from Iran by the name of Mona Mahmoud-Nejad in the city of Shiraz had been arrested in high school for writing an essay in which she demanded her human rights. In the summer of 1983, Mona, together with 9 other Baha'i women, were taken to a field in the city of Shiraz and executed by hanging. And when that news came to me, I remember the first thing I thought was, why her and not me? Because the only difference between us is that my family immigrated to Canada, right, and her stayed behind in Iran. And as a teenager, you think about your future, all your dreams, all your aspirations, and you realize that her life has been extinguished, and you ask yourself, well, what is the meaning of my life? And I realized that sometimes a meaningful death is better than a meaningless life.
Wow, that's an intense thing to say.
You're
talking about martyrdom in a way?
Well, maybe not the way we understand it, in terms of, suicide bombing or whatever, but maybe what it means to be a living martyr, what it means to sacrifice yourself for something that you believe in.
If your life stands for something.
Exactly. That's the point.
In your life or in your death or both.
Yes. Mona had no choice. She gave her life for what she believed in because she lived in a country where people were executed simply because of their beliefs. But I lived in a free country. So I asked myself, what is my freedom worth if it's wasted on selfish mediocrity?
Right.
In this, as I said, consumerist culture, which celebrates superficial distractions and hedonism and what have you. So that was a turning point for me, where I decided that I'm going to dedicate my life to fighting for justice. Because Mona's last wish was for the youth to arise in service to humankind. So I took that very seriously. And I'm really glad, Rain, that I did, because it changed entirely the course of my life. It took me to places I never imagined, to war zones around the world, in search of peace, in search of justice. And I don't want to romanticize it. I've seen a lot of really horrible things in Yugoslavia and Rwanda with ISIS in northern Iraq, and I could go on to talk about the Genocide World Tour, which is really a catastrophic to see our capacity for cruelty and evil. But I've also seen the astonishing resilience of the human spirit. I've also seen the most extraordinary people who rise up in the darkest moments and shine their light in demanding justice and fighting for human dignity. So I think one of the big mistakes that we make in our superficial materialistic ideas of what happiness is all about is to think that we can achieve progress without struggle, without sacrifice, without suffering. This, in fact, I think is why we have so much misery in our world of plenty, in our world of exceptional prosperity. We are experiencing anxiety and depression and despair because we have a culture which feeds the ego, not the soul. So your program, Soul Boom, I think really hits the nail right on the head.
Ego Boom was taken.
Okay, there we go. Well, I think Soul Boom is great because one of the greatest things you can do for your own self is to live a life of service for humankind. You're not helping anyone except yourself. And in a sense, by giving of yourself to others, you are experiencing and unfolding your human potential. So still, after all these years, Mona's sacrifice still resonates with me and touches me very deeply. And it makes me realize that all journeys begin by being touched by something very deep. And understanding justice begins with experiencing injustice and understanding that we cannot remain indifferent to what is happening in the world, that we are responsible, because all it takes for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. That is why we have the terrible things that we see in the world, because most people don't care. They don't know, they don't care. But when people awaken, when people mobilize, when people act in solidarity with each other, their potential is immense. Just as very small elites throughout history have committed acts of great and radical evil, we too, people of goodwill, can achieve acts of great nobility and progress if we understand our immense potential.
And I specifically want to get to some really heartbreaking stories about some of the women that are currently imprisoned and the persecution of so many amazing Baha'i women, artists and lawyers, and just housewives and mothers behind bars in prison for no other reason than they're Baha'is.
There have been a series of revolutionary uprisings, the most recent and most notable of which was perhaps the first feminist revolution in history, the Woman Life Liberty movement of 2022, which was called the Mahsa Amini Revolution, after the young woman Mahsa Amini, who was basically beaten to death for failing to cover her hair properly. So today in Iran, there's unprecedented sympathy for the Baha'is, as people have awakened to the fact that the more that the regime tries to demonize the minority, the more that people believe there must be something really good about them. So that's why they're being demonized. So now there is unprecedented sympathy for the Baha'is, and especially in the women's movement. We go back to not just the execution of Mona and the 9 other women in Shiraz in the summer of 1983, but even if you go further back in the 19th century, there is a famous heroic figure by the name of Tahireh, who was a poetess, legendary poetess, who is celebrated by Iranian feminists, Baha'i and non-Baha'i alike, who, because she unveiled herself and spoke about the equality of men and women, was put to death. And just before she was executed, she famously said, "You can kill me, but you cannot stop the emancipation of women."
Currently, the persecution seems to be aimed a lot at Baha'i women, of all stripes. I think 2/3 of Baha'is that are currently behind bars simply for being Baha'is, again, this is not like for doing anything or just practicing their faith, are women. And these women have been stripped of any kind of due process. Can you talk about this very specific, right now, 2025 situation with the imprisoned women and the effects that might be having on their family and the lack of due process that these women have been given?
Emancipated women are a fundamental threat to this backward misogynist theocracy. On January 22nd, around the city of Isfahan in Iran, at 6 a.m. in the morning, the equivalent of SWAT teams raided the homes of some 10 young women as if they were incredibly dangerous criminals. So there were violent raids on their home, and without any arrest warrant, without any basis, these women were arrested, brought back into prison, having already been subject to arrests and prosecutions before. And this is happening at a time when the country is sinking into ever greater poverty. People are suffering from inflation. They have difficulty putting food on the table. So one sees that just as the fortunes and needs of ordinary people are deteriorating, there is this acceleration of demonization and persecution against the Baha'is. And one sees really the absurdity of trying to blame a peaceful community that simply wants to serve its society, to try and deflect attention away from, the real woes and injustices. But I don't think the Iranian people are buying it anymore. And unfortunately, people have awakened to the fact that the Baha'is are not the source of all evil that they were made out to be, that in fact, they're victims of a gross injustice.
And it should be said that one of the teachings of the Baha'i faith is that Baha'is are supposed to remain loyal to their government. Even if they're a part of like a really unjust government, Baha'is are working for something larger, like the spiritual transformation of humanity. So not breaking any laws and being essentially good citizens, which Baha'is have been of Iran since the get-go, is part of the Baha'i DNA.
Well, exactly. The Baha'is certainly don't believe in sedition or violence. The Baha'is do believe in social transformation, but they believe that the way to achieve it is through spiritual empowerment, education, service to one's society. But once again, if you have built an ideology based on obsessive hatred and violence, something as simple as a community that believes in spiritual enlightenment and service to society and equality of men and women, becomes a threat. So it's a remarkable sort of David and Goliath contest. But what is also inspiring is that some 50 years after the revolution, with all the billions of dollars of resources at the disposal of the Iranian government, whether through the intelligence services or the Revolutionary Guards, they have not succeeded in silencing the Baha'i community. But to the contrary, the only thing they've succeeded in doing is winning the sympathy of millions of Iranians towards the Baha'i community as the truth becomes clear of their innocence. So there is also something inspiring there about the power of truth, the power of steadfastness in one's belief in the face of injustice, and not compromising your beliefs, even if the other side is being unjust towards you. You must still maintain your moral integrity.
That's so well said. And just taking it back to both the book Soul Boom and to our beloved Baha'i faith, there's this idea that's woven into concepts of spiritual transformation of humanity, that there are two forces at work in the world. There's forces of disintegration and forces of integration. You have been working for integration, fighting for world peace in the world courts and at your university and in the refugee camps. I think it's hard for young people to rectify these two opposing forces. There's so much chaos and destruction and authoritarianism and forces that are ripping people apart, fomenting hatred and distrust and outrage. And yet at the same time, there is seems to me a movement towards peace and towards enlightenment and towards seeing the possibility of humans coming together in peace and love and harmony. And I think for a lot of young people, like of my son's generation, it's really hard to rectify both of these forces. But that image really helps me. Like, oh, this is a force of disintegration and this is a force of integration. My job is to hitch my wagon to the forces of integration. And that can be at a really small level. Like you said, it can be at the dinner table. It can be at your church. It can be in your cul-de-sac. It can be, with your family and friends, your church community. In that, there is hope in finding fellow like-minded people searching for integration.
There are remarkable number of people of goodwill, as I've seen, and very often they're not the ones that are the most visible. They're not the ones with the most power, because very often those who really, in the depth of their heart, want to do good, don't seek fame and recognition. So to me, I've met the most powerful people in the world, the most prominent people in the world, but the ones who have touched me the deepest are the unsung heroes, those who want to do good in the silence of their own conscience. And those are the souls that shine light in the darkness. So instead of
the candles,
exactly, instead of dwelling on the darkness and being so upset by it, let us dwell on the light and be detached from all the illusions that diminish our power and resilience.
And like candles, shedding light and giving of ourselves.
Absolutely.
In service and connection. Piam Akhvan, this has been just chef's kiss. What a beautiful conversation. I'm so glad we got to touch on the topic of world peace. Like I started to say in Soul Boom, we've talked about a lot about, mental health and struggles and addiction and building community on a small level. Sometimes it's really important to just have a global conversation and reflect on that. Thank you for your tremendous work, and thanks for being a part of the now part of the Soul Boom family.
Thank you very much, Rain. Very good to see you.
The Soul Boom Podcast. Subscribe now on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever else you get your stupid podcasts.